Okay. Um, I have this small table here, and we have a column that contains the basic salary, another contains the housing allowance, then we have another that says transport allowance. Let's say all these are due a staff that works in a company. Then we want to calculate how much everything is. So let's say we want to calculate the gross salary. Let's say we want to calculate the gross salary from this. It's a basic mathematical function. What we have to do is, add the basic salary, add the housing allowance, add the transport allowance, then we'll get the gross salary of a staff. So doing that in Excel, since we have the function sum, let's use the function sum and let's do that briefly. So once we do that, if we decide to drag down to repeat what we did for the other rows, we would see that Excel automatically uses the same formula for the other rows, but then it increases by 1 for each row. In this case, my sum was equal to A2 to C2. So Excel was summing this way. But the moment I dragged it down a step, Excel was summing this same way, but then it was working with A3, B3, and C3. The moment I dragged it down a step again, Excel was working with A4, C4, A4, B4, and C4. The moment I brought it down again, Excel was working with A5, B5, and C5. And it does not matter whether we have 1,000 rows. The moment we decide to replicate our results over the rows, Excel is going to keep, repeating the same formula and adding the rows. For this row now, it would have been A7 plus B7 plus C7 would have given me the answer to my gross salary here. Now, that is a relative reference. When we come to Excel, we have different referencing methods. We have what we call a relative reference method. For instance, I say A2, for instance. This is relative because the moment you are working with something like A2, if you decide to drag the formula down, it changes to A3, A4, A5, A6, and so on. So this is a relative reference. I'll say this is a relative reference. Let me make that black back. Well, let me make this. So this is a relative reference. Then we look at something that is semi-fixed. Semi-fixed. When we are looking at a reference that is semi-fixed, this means that you are looking at, for instance, if we try to fix the cell A2 halfway, we'll be having something like $A2, or we'll be having something like A $2. Now I would explain all of these concepts. Then we have what we call an absolute reference. When we say absolute reference, absolute reference. When we say absolute reference, it means that you're having something like $2. So in Excel, all these things are different. They have different meaning if you are doing row and column calculations. For the first one, okay, let me make this of another color. And make this bold. So for this very first guy, we are having our A, which represents the column, and we're having our 2, which represents the rows, right? But then we are not locking any one of them. We are making them free. And that was exactly what we did here. Did you notice that? A minute. When I was typing in this formula, let me erase this. When I was typing in this formula, all I did was input A2 and drag it to C2. And Excel is automatically going to replicate for me line by line because it's going to keep moving a step at a time. So whenever you write your formula like this, Excel assumes that you want to move a step at a time. It's another thing when you're working with a semi-fixed reference, because now you are either locking the column or you are locking the row. A dollar sign is a symbol to lock in Excel. So in this very first case, if I say dollar A2, what I'm basically doing is that I'm locking my column, but I'm leaving my row to move freely because my dollar sign is before my column. Remember, columns in Excel are represented with alphabets. Rows are represented with numbers. So if I say $A2, I'm locking my column, but I'm leaving my row to move freely. As opposed to that, if I come and say $2, what I'm doing is that I'm freeing my column to move freely, but then I'm locking my row. So my row now is not going to be able to move, but my column is going to move freely. The same concept applies to our absolute reference. Whenever we are working with absolute reference and we put dollar between both the column and the row, we are saying we don't want our values to move at all. Either it be on the column aspect or on the row aspect. We want it locked to a particular value. For instance, if we want to perform all our calculations with only one value. So I'm going to explain this concept with this multiplication table that we have underneath. So we are going to get the concept more clearly, because this is a part that looks more confusing to people that want to get into analysis with Excel or any other spreadsheet package. So let me try to explain the concept with the multiplication table I built for us down here. Okay. So we have table 1 to 12, just like we have behind our notebooks in our secondary school notebooks. So what we want to do is we want to get the values out, right? And it is important that we understand the concept of cell referencing, because if we just decide to multiply cells by cells without using cell referencing, we are never going to get the correct answers. For instance, let's try that. Let's use a relative reference without locking any of the column or the row. Let me do that. So if I say this equal to 1 times 1, and I say enter, yes, that will be correct. But then let me try to replicate this same thing for the other rows, and let's see if the answers are correct. Now, this looks strange, does it not? Because immediately I did 1 times 1, and I got 1. And I tried to replicate it. Excel was supposed to do for me 1 times 2, 2, 1 times 3, 3, 1 times 4, 4, 1 times 5, 5. But then I'm having something that looks very strange. That's because Excel moves line by line. If you refuse to lock your formula, when you try to replicate it for the next line, Excel moves away from that line and works with another line. Now, let's see the formula Excel is using and why we are getting these odd numbers. Now, for the very first row I worked with, I did 1 times 1. Yeah, that's correct. That was B9. That was B9 times A10. And A10 is here, B9 is here. So that was correct. The moment I brought it down, Excel moved from B9 to B10. And it was now B10 times A11 times A11. So do you see the concept here? Excel was doing, when I did this times this, when Excel moved to the next one, he did this times this. When he moved to the next one, he did this times this. When he moved to the next one, he did this times this. So he was always moving a row higher. He did this times this. He did this times this. And he did this times this. That was why the number was increasing in a pace I didn't want it to. So Excel automatically will move line by line. But you have to control it. You have to tell Excel, this is what I want you to do, and this is what I don't want you to do. Now, remember that when we worked on gross salary, that worked. Why did that work? Because all we were working on were on the same line. So if Excel finished with this line and it moved to this line, it was still going to be correct. If we move to this line afterwards, we're still going to be correct. But now we are working with a value that is in a fixed column. We want to multiply this by all of this one by one. But we didn't clarify that to Excel because we used a relative reference when we should have used either a semi-fixed reference or an absolute reference. I want somebody to come in. Now, do we understand the concept before I move on? Are we grasping the concept? Hello?
Yes.
I hope we are getting the concept. Hello? Is that the network?
Yes, we are getting
Okay.
it.
Okay,
I'm getting
beautiful.
it anyway. Can't speak for
Beautiful.
that.
Okay. So that tells me that I have to erase my formula if I plan to be able to replicate my formula throughout this thing and be able to get my answers out. I have to find a way to work on this my formula, because this my formula will not give me all these answers unless I decide to now start doing everything one by one. I can decide to say this times this and it will work for me. Then I'll still decide to come and say this times this. It will still work for me. I can decide to start going that way. But then how long before I finish working on the multiplication table? How long? It's not like I'm planning to sleep here. Because as much as you are learning data analysis, you have to learn how to optimize your workflow. You have to learn how to be fast. Two analysts can work on the same data and they'll finish different times, maybe hours before the other person. You have to learn to work fast. So that's why you need to understand this concept of cell referencing. So what I'll do is I'll write the formula so that I'm able to drag it and replicate it for the other cells. So let me erase this. So what I'll do now is I'll say equal to this times this. But then I won't stop there because I want to multiply all of this row by only this one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put an absolute lock on both the column and the row of 1 because I don't want 1 to move to the next line on the row and I don't want to move to the next line on the column. So I'm locking it down so that Excel understands that I want to multiply this by 1. So if we do that, then another thing I have to do is I have to also lock this column because all my workings will be around this column. I want to be multiplying this with this column consistently. I don't want to jump to another column. I want 1 to multiply 1, 1 to multiply 2, 1 to multiply 3, 1 to multiply 4, 1 to multiply 5. So I'm constantly working on column A. So I will lock my column A down. And now let me click on enter. I click on enter. Let me now try to replicate the value for the other cells. You see it works fine now. That's the concept of cell referencing in Excel. Now, I can decide to use the same formula I've gotten now to work on the second table, table 2. I can say this equal to this times this, right? Then I'll come and lock it the same way I locked my 1 and lock this. Lock my 2 down so it does not move. I'm locking this 2 down so it does not move at all. Then I'm locking the column of this so it does not move too. So if I do that and I drag it down, it should work fine for me. Yes. So this is the concept of, I'm using an absolute reference here and I'm using a relative, a semi-fixed reference here. All of this is locked, but all of this is not locked. And now I can generate my multiplication table with ease. Now, there are deeper concepts to cell referencing. I would love to touch that, but that's not now because I want you guys to first grasp this concept. there's a way we can do it, and we can just drag at once. Then all the cells and the columns, the answers will come out at once. But then it has to be step by step. You guys have to understand this concept fully first. When you understand this concept fully, then we can move on. So the same way we did for 1 and 2, let's try to do it for 3 too. Let's not be ahead of ourselves. So what we'll do is say equal to this times this. But then remember, I want to lock my 3 down because I want to multiply all of this by 3. So I'm going to lock my 3 down again on both sides. Then I'm going to lock my column A down here. So once I lock that down, I can do it. I can bring it down for everything, right? Yeah, so let's stop there for the time. Do we get the concept of cell referencing now? Hello? Are we there?
Well, I believe with practice it will be clear.
Yes. With more practice to be clearer. In fact, there are more cunning concepts about it, but then it will make your work easier. But I just decided to start with this so you can understand that cell referencing will make your work a lot faster and a lot easier. So any other person here to give us a go ahead so we can move on from here? Please, we need somebody else to give us a go ahead. Can we move on? Okay. Not to take much of our time. Let's move on. So let's look at, the concept of Vlookups in Excel. I want to look at the concept of Vlookups in Excel. Now, for instance, we have a table like this where we have fruits and we have amounts. I want to look out for, let's say, the particular amount that a fruit is sold for. Now, the function might not make more sense because our table is very small. So you might say it's easy to even find this with my eyes. Yes, but then many times you are working on data where you have rows upon rows upon rows upon rows, hundreds of rows. And for instance, you want to find the amount of a fruit. You don't have to start finding that with your eyes among hundreds of rows of data. You can easily use a function, a VLOOKUP function, and that will really help you to find what you want to find with just a formula in a split of a second. So what we do with VLOOKUP is there is a function called VLOOKUP. So we call that, once we say VLOOKUP, then you see Excel automatically brings out the formula for us. We say, what do we want to look up? We want to look up apple, comma, and it says the table array. That means the table that you want to search for, the table you want to work on to search for whatever you want to find. So we click the entire table, we drag the entire table into it. So once we drag the entire table into it, we use comma. Then we use column index number. There's a concept called column index number when we are working with VLOOKUP. Your first column is your column 1, and your first column is your column 1, and your second column is your column 2. It does not matter whether you have 5 columns. You keep numbering them from 1, 2, 3. So fruits is where I have my column 1. Fruit is my column 1. Then my amount is column 2. Now, so because the amount I want to find for apple is in my column 2, so I'm going to impute 2. Oh my God, 10 minutes more. Okay, so I'm going to impute 2. So then Excel asks me, do I want the approximate match or the exact match? Because I want the exact match, I would say false. And once I enter that, you see that Excel gives me the price of apple instantly. That's the concept behind VLOOKUP. Let's take this example. In this case, I'll apply the VLOOKUP function again, right? What's the value I want to find? I want to find the price of pork. So I'm going to input pork in the first instance. I'm going to say comma. And I'm going to impute my table because Excel says table array. So I'm going to impute my table. And I'm going to put a comma. Then the column index number of the column where I want to find the amount. Like I said, you have to number it. This is 1 in this case. This is 2. So the column index number is 2. So once I impute 2, then I say comma, then I find the exact match. I tell Excel, find me the exact match. You see that Excel tells me that the price of pork I was looking for is 10 naira, for instance. This is the concept behind VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is just for you, to find a data that is associated with a particular column and they're on the same row. For instance, you see that Apple and the price of Apple are on the same row here. So I just needed to locate Apple on the table and locate the table, then find the amount they sell apples. The same thing happens with pork. I just needed to locate pork, then locate the column where the prices of pork are, then it's going to find out for me the price of pork. So this is the concept of VLOOKUPs in Excel. Many people find it complex, but then it's not something so big. You just have to understand the pattern to it. There's a pattern to everything. But then it works beautifully if you're working on large sets of data. You don't have to start going forth and back to look, what is this? What is this? You can use your VLOOKUP to find whatever you want to find in a minute or two. Yeah. So that's the concept of VLOOKUP in Excel. So can we proceed from here? Hello? Is that my network? Hello? I think the network is maybe something else tonight. Hello, can we hear me, guys?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, as we round up, let's touch the concept of Sumif and Countifs. Sumif and Countifs. The concept of Countif is basically to count for a criteria. And the function is just function countif. Countif. There's a function called countif in Excel. So what it does is once you select your countif function, you select the range. For instance, I want to count the number of apples in this table. So I select the range of the fruits. Then I select my criteria. What's my criteria? Apples. So once I select apples as a criteria, Excel automatically counts how many times apple shows in this table for me. For instance, I have apples here. I have apples here. I have apples here, making it 3 times. So Excel has done the job of, counting for me how many times I have apple in this array of fruits. In this column of fruits. So that's about the function countif in Excel. It's not a big thing.
Sorry, repeat it again.
Okay. Let me work with that again. So for countif, what you do is you say equal to countif. You select the entire column where you have that thing you want to count. For instance, I want to count the number of apples. So I select this column where apple is. Then I say comma. Then I select what I want to count, apple. So once I select apple as what I want to count, I enter. It tells me apple appears 3 times here. 1, 2, 3. So that's the concept of countif in Excel. So then there is a more complex concept for countif that is called the Countifs. In the case of Countifs, you are looking at 2 conditions. For instance, in this case, I want to find oranges. But then I don't want to find oranges alone. I want to find oranges of type Florida. That is Florida oranges. That's what I want to find, right? Now, if we look at our data, we see that there's actually a type of orange that is from Florida. So I want to count how many times we have Florida orange in this table set. Remember, in this set, we counted how many times we had apples, only a condition. But in this case, we'll be counting how many times we have oranges that are a Florida type oranges. So what I'll do is I'll say equal to, as opposed to the other function, now I will say Countifs, because I'm looking for more than a condition, right? So once I say Countifs, I select the first criteria range, fruit, comma, then I select the first criteria, which is oranges. Then I put my comma, then I select the second criteria range, which is the type of the fruit. I say comma. Then I select the criteria, which is Florida. So once I select that and click on enter, it tells me that Florida oranges appear only one time in the table. And as you can see, there's actually only one time. Oranges from Florida appeared only here. There is no other places that it appears. In this case, it was also oranges, but then it was not Florida. In this case, it was oranges too, and it was not Florida. So Florida oranges appear only once in this table. Is that clear, Mr. Principal?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So for the sake of time, we are going to be ending the class now. So we are going to continue from here the next time. But then I'm probably going to send an assignment, a sheet to the group tonight, so we can all, look into it and try to work one or two things out based on all the functions and all the formula that we have been learning since we started the course, right? Okay. Yes, you can do that. Okay. So that's the concept behind count and Countifs. So I want to say a big thank you to you guys for attending tonight's class. I really appreciate your presence. So what I'll do is I'll drop a copy of this file I'm using for tonight's class on the group so that you guys can look at it again and just practice with it. Then I'm going to drop an exercise on the group that we can practice with so that we can, we can submit and I can assess how far we are really learning with what we've been doing since this couple of days. So thank you for attending tonight's meeting. Thank you so much, guys. I thank you for your presence. So that's going to be about it for this night. So I hope you guys learned a
Thank
thing or two
you.
from the class.
Sure, sure. The VLOOKUP, though it looks serious, but like I said, with practice, when you have so many data to work with, you'll be able
Yeah.
to grasp it.
Yes, I understand. Nothing easy, nothing good comes easy. You have to work on it and work on. That's why I'm going to release a practice file of this so you guys can work with it. If there are any questions at all, I'm on the WhatsApp group. You guys can reach out to me to ask your questions, and I'll be happy to give answers to them, right? So
Okay.
have a good night's rest.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. So Olushola, have a good night rest too.